Hi there, this is CS Professor Pam with Jumpstart Code, and we are continuing to learn JavaScript. We're going to move into one of the next important concepts in JavaScript, which is conditionals or decisions. But before we do that, we are going to work on a little project, and what I want to challenge you to do is pause my video and try to do some coding and then come back and check out how you've done. So what I want you to start with, we're just going to do a review of what we've been doing so far, is build this little miles per gallon calculator. So the first thing that you will need to do is to create the HTML. So what that means is, you sketch out what you want to create. I have this here. And you need to think about what all these elements are. So this can be an H1. You need the user to input miles and gallons. So you will need two text boxes for that. Then you will need a button that gets clicked in order to do the calculation. And then you will need a place to display the output. All right. So this is pretty simple HTML to create. I want to challenge you to pause the video right now and see if you can build this, and then come back, and I am now going to show you what I have. All right, let's take a look. I have actually created a file called mpg.html, and we have all of the standard things in the beginning, and I have a title. This is called MPG Calculator, and I have those elements. So I have an H1 for my heading. I have these inputs. If you were wondering how to get the input boxes on different lines like this, I just used the break element right now. We're going to learn later on some other ways to do this formatting, but in the beginning when you're learning, and especially right now when our focus is primarily JavaScript, we just want to keep things simple. So I have an input for text that has an ID of miles, and I gave it a placeholder, so I'll get this text inside of it that shows me what I want the user to input. We could, of course, put paragraph elements or label elements to show that as well. But again, I'm trying to keep the HTML very simple right now. I have a second input that represents gallons, so it has that ID, also with a placeholder. Again, a break to make sure we go to the next line. And then I have a button, and my button has an ID of calc, C-A-L-C. It says calculate. If we wanted to, yeah. And then I have an H2, and you'll notice what I did. I have these words miles per gallon that I want to stay there, but I want to just be able to put in the value that's calculated. So I have a span element inside of this H2, and it has an ID of MPG. So when I do the calculation, I'm going to put that result just right here. And I am connected to a script that is called mpg.js, right? All right, so now I would like you to pause the video and set up your mpg.js file. And remember, the first thing that you should do is just put an alert in there to make sure that everything is connected. So pause the video and get your mpg.js started. All right, so I hope you did that. Let me show you what I have here. So let's not talk about this part right now. So the first thing we want to do is this alert. I also have something new here that I think I may not have shown you in previous videos, but use strict is a good thing to help you with your troubleshooting sometimes in terms of having variable names that are mistyped. So this is not required, but it's a useful thing to have here. So I have this alert, and so now I want to test. I'm going to save all, and let's make sure that my JavaScript is connected before I move on. So if I refresh this page, I see that it's connected, right? Because it's really important to do that. Because if you are just moving on, writing your JavaScript, and things aren't working, you may start actually making corrections to code that is fine, because the whole problem is just a problem with the file name. So for example, if I misspelled this file name here, if this is mpgg.js, then, and I test it and I don't see that alert, there's a problem that I need to fix right now. Okay, so I've got to just double check and make sure that things are connected. All right, so now that we know that that's connected, then the next step is when I click this button, we have to have a function that is executed. So we need to create an event listener for this button. So why don't you pause and see if you can do that based on what we've done in previous videos, and then I will come back here and show you. All right, so I have added my event listener. Notice I wrote myself a comment first to be clear about what I'm intending to do. So I need to select that button using get element by ID. I need to add an event listener to it. I want something to happen when I click that button, and what I want to happen is have it call a function. And I decided that the name of this function will be calcmpg. Notice those capital letters there. So here I have created the start of my function, and all I have in it is an alert so I can make sure that it's connected, right? Because again, that's really important to not go too fast without checking if things are working. So let's save this. And actually I don't need this alert anymore. It'll be kind of irritating. So as I check things off and know that they work, then I just comment out the code that was helping me to verify that. All right, and also remember, when you are doing JavaScript, you should always have your console open just in case you have any syntax errors, because that's the only way that you're going to see them. All right, so let me refresh this page and see what happens when I click this button. When I click this button, I have an alert. So that tells me that this is the place where I want to write the instructions for what to do when the button is clicked. All right, now before we start writing code, we should write comments of what is the plan, right? Remember, computer programming is typically you need to get some input, do some processing of that input, and then display some result. So let's write some comments for this. I need to get miles from the text box and store as a decimal number, right? Remember, in a previous video, we've learned about the fact that the data that is typed into a text box is assumed to be string data. So if I know that they're numbers, I need to make sure and convert them. I need to get the gallons from the text box and store as decimal. So we're storing into variables. Once we have our two inputs, I can calculate my miles per gallon. You should create a variable for that. And then I want to display the result on the web page. One of the reasons why it's really important to write out these comments is to, first of all, just have a clear picture of what you want to do. and to make sure you have things in the right sequence. Because, for example, I can't have my first statement to calculate the miles per gallon because I don't know the miles and I don't know the gallons yet. So it's important to outline the plan and make sure that things are in the right order. All right, again, I would like you guys to pause the video and see if you can make a little progress on how to write these statements. Initially, so just work on getting the miles and the gallons. And remember, we want to use console log to verify that you actually have those values. All right, so let's do this. So we're going to create a variable. Remember, when we create a variable, there's two keywords we typically use, either let or const. In this case, I'm going to use const because this user input is not going to change once I receive it. It will still work with let, but const is a slightly better choice here. So I'm going to create a variable called miles, and I am going to go to my document, get element by ID. I have an ID called miles. In that text box, I need to get the value. And if I want to store this as a decimal, I need to put all of this, surround all of this with parse float in parentheses, right? Now, before I even do gallons, let's make sure miles works, because if it doesn't, then we don't want to make the same mistake twice, all right? So I'm going to say miles is, and just to also show you that we have converted it into a number, I'm going to say type is type of miles. We've talked about this in a previous video too. So let's just take our time, make sure that this is okay. All right, so what I'm going to do is put a number in here. Since I'm only testing miles, it doesn't matter if I put a number in the other one. Let's click on calculate and look at what I got. I have retrieved that input and I've stored it into a variable called miles, and I've printed it out so I can see that it's correct, and I can also see that that variable is represented as a number. Okay, so now that we know how to do that, we can do gallons. Okay, same thing, const gallons equals, so I can use what I'm seeing up there. I need to parse float, and then I need to go to my document, get element by ID, gallons dot value. Now I'm going to make a little mistake here. Suppose I just do this, right? Because mistakes are part of programming, trust me. And a lot of times the mistakes are just not because you don't know how to do it, they're just human errors. Okay, so let's see what happens here. So I'm going to put in something for miles. I'm going to put in something for gallons. And if I click on calculate, I get an error. All right, now when you get error messages like this, sometimes because they're in red, they're kind of jarring and you don't like looking at them, but you have to learn to be okay with looking at error messages and understanding what they mean. So this is telling me whenever you see some reference to null, it's a good hint that you probably have a typo in an ID or a variable name, because basically, and see, it's telling me to look at line 16 in my JavaScript file. And so JavaScript has gone to the DOM and it's looking for something with an ID of gallon. And if we go over here, I don't have anything with an ID of gallon. I have gallons. So if it's unable to find that element, then it can't extract the value. And that's what it's complaining about, right? So if I correct it, then now if we refresh the page and we put in some number here, we calculate. Now I see that I have retrieved that value correctly, right? So now you can calculate your miles per gallon. We should store that in a variable. Again, for this little simple example, we're not going to be changing that value. So we can use const mpg equals, how do I do this calculation? It's just miles divided by gallons, right? And these extra spaces here, doesn't matter whether you put these extra spaces here or not. That's just sometimes the way I like to do things. Okay, again, let's double check and see what we have. Okay, and when you're testing this now, you need to test it with some numbers that kind of make sense. You don't want to use just any random numbers. So that's why I'm going 300 miles. Let's say that's 12.5 gallons, right? And so I get 24, all right? I also want to make sure that was quite an even number. Let's just make sure that we can get a decimal value. Yes, you see if I put in 312.2, that just gives me confidence that I've done my calculation correctly. All right, so let's display this on our web page. I have this span that has an ID of MPG. So if I say document get element by ID MPG dot, so that is going to be text content because it's an HTML element, equals MPG. So I'm saying take what's on the right and put it in the place on the left. That is an assignment statement, right? I didn't want to do save as, I wanted to do save all. Okay, let's put in 300 miles. Let's make our car a little better mileage. Let's say 9.5. And we get that. Now we get this kind of long, crazy number. I'd like to clean this up and make this maybe 1 decimal place. So if I want to do that, there is a function called toFixed. So here on MPG, if I go toFixed, notice the capital letter, and put 1, I'm saying take this number and display it with 1 decimal place. Okay, so let's do this again. And let's put in 300. Let's put in 9.5. And you can see over here what the actual calculated number is, but what is being displayed is this number with 1 decimal place, and it's being it rounds up. So 31.57 rounds up to 31.6, right? And if we do another one, so if I do 350 and 10.1, right? 34.65, 34.7, right? But one of the things you want to do when you test, what happens if I click this button and I haven't actually entered any input? So I get this very strange thing called NaN. And this is what we're going to start talking about in the next video, is the fact that if I am getting input from the user, this calculate button is assuming you have typed something or requires that the user have typed something into both of these text boxes. So there really is another step that we need to add to our process, which is to make sure there is something in those text boxes before we proceed. And that is going to require us to learn about conditionals and making decisions. So we will start that in the next video.